Picture this. You're sitting in a language class. You're repeating after the teacher, and your pronunciation is, well, it's absolutely flawless. I mean, you sound like a local. But then you step outside, you run into a native speaker, and you try to have a casual, spontaneous conversation. And suddenly, your brain completely betrays you, and that thick, unmistakable accent from your native language comes roaring right back. It's a universally frustrating experience for pretty much anyone trying to master a second language. Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to decode the cognitive mystery of why our perfect classroom pronunciation seems to just vanish the second we step into the real world. So I've got to ask you directly, why is it that just chatting with a friend instantly brings back your native-sounding accent? Like, what is actually happening in our brains that overrides all those hours of careful practice? That specific tension, the gap between what we know we can sound like and what we actually sound like when we're just trying to get a point across, that is exactly what we're unpacking today.
Okay, Section 1, the language transfer phenomenon.
Let's dive right into this. To understand why this happens, we need to demystify some of the heavy academic jargon right out of the gate. First up is language transfer. In linguistics, this simply means your knowledge of your first language, which researchers call your L1, is activating inside your second language, your L2. Second, we have interlanguage. And honestly, this is a beautiful concept. It means that as a learner, your second language isn't just some broken version of the target language. It's actually its very own developing, independent system inside your brain, complete with its own unique rules that you are actively building.
Now, researchers have actually been studying the mechanics of how our native tongue sabotages our new language for decades. For instance, Gabriela Casper beautifully outlined this exact psycholinguistic perspective way back in her 1984 keynote paper for the British Association for Applied Linguistics. So this proves it isn't just about having bad habits, it's really about deep cognitive processing.
Moving right along to Section 2, learning versus communicating. To really understand why our accents change depending on the situation, we have to look at our ultimate goal in that moment. There is a massive functional difference between transfer in learning and transfer in communication. When you're learning, you're in a quiet, analytical state, right? Your brain is using your native language to establish hypotheses about the new language's rules. You're basically building the architecture. But when you're communicating, that's a real-time scramble. Your primary goal is just to get your point across to the listener, and to do that quickly, your brain basically panic buys. It reaches back and activates your native L1 knowledge just to successfully execute the sentence, completely bypassing those shiny new rules you just learned. Now, what's really fascinating here is how researchers categorize the sheer volume of our native language that we bring over during this scramble. It slides all the way from simple borrowing, like throwing an English word into the middle of a Spanish sentence, down to literal translation or relexification, and finally to complex combinatory transfers. That's where learners literally mix native and target rules to create entirely new hybrid language structures completely on the fly. Which brings us to Section 3, 2 types of knowledge. So how do these transfers actually happen? Well, researchers draw a sharp line between 2 types of communicative knowledge: declarative and procedural. I absolutely love this analogy. Declarative knowledge is like reading a manual. It's your memorized linguistic rules, your grammar tables, your vocabulary lists. It's knowing that something is true. Procedural knowledge, on the other hand, is like actually riding a bike. It's dynamic, real-time execution. It's knowing how to do something. So you can have a perfect declarative understanding of how an English R or a Spanish R is physically formed in the mouth, but still lack the procedural knowledge to dynamically produce it in the middle of a super fast-paced sentence.
All right, Section 4, the role of attention.
So, what happens when learners are forced to ride that procedural bike in a busy, spontaneous conversation? How does the brain cope with that overwhelm? It all comes down to how our brain manages mental bandwidth, specifically through attention and automatization. Our attention is actually split. Focal attention is our high-level focus. In a conversation, this is entirely consumed by meaning, by what we're actually trying to say. Subsidiary attention is the background processing, which handles the actual pronunciation. Furthermore, our brain has controlled procedures, which are slow and deliberate, and automatic procedures, which are fast and entirely unconscious. When you're chatting with a friend, your focal attention is so busy figuring out the meaning of the conversation that it just leaves the actual pronunciation up to your automatic procedures. And what is most automatic for you? You guessed it, your native language. And this brilliantly illustrates the concept of style shifting. When you have high attention available, like say during isolated drills in a classroom, you actually have the bandwidth for accurate target language pronunciation. But the second you enter free speech, your bandwidth is completely gone, automatic procedures take over, and you instantly revert to native language variants. Your accuracy fluctuates purely based on how much mental attention you can afford to pay to your mouth. This naturally leads into Section 5, why pronunciation fossilizes. Let's move from abstract cognitive theory to some real-world behavior based on some really fascinating research from Otsuma Tama High School in Japan. The researcher there contrasted two very different language learning environments. On one side, you have an ESL setting, English as a second language, where the learner is completely immersed in the language in their daily life. On the other side, you have an EFL setting, English as a foreign language, where the language is basically only encountered inside a classroom, kind of like high school students learning English in Japan. The data shows that while immersed ESL learners do slowly improve their spontaneous pronunciation over time, EFL learners face a much harsher reality. They often just get completely stuck.
This getting stuck is known in linguistics as fossilization. The researcher observed over 2,000 Japanese learners of English over nearly 10 years and found that in these non-immersive classroom settings, a learner's pronunciation accuracy essentially freezes in the first 1 or 2 years of study. It fossilizes. Astonishingly, this happens, and it literally doesn't matter what the total learning time is. This means that a third-year student's spontaneous accent might be no more accurate than a first-year student's, simply because they've already cemented those early automatic native language transfers.
The researcher sums up our core frustration perfectly here, noting, even students who manage to pronounce isolated words in the target-like manner often fall back on the native language-like variants once in free speech. I mean, it's the ultimate proof, right? Knowing the rules declaratively, being able to do the isolated classroom drills perfectly, is absolutely not the same thing as executing them procedurally when your focal attention is totally consumed by a natural conversation. So, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that your lingering accent isn't a failure of practice. It's actually a completely natural byproduct of how the human brain allocates its cognitive resources during real-time communication. So, what does this all mean for you? The next time you're speaking a second language and you get really excited or distracted, pay close attention. You might just catch your brain taking that automatic shortcut right back to your mother tongue. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep observing this fascinating linguistic mechanics out there in your daily life.